If you've ever asked yourself, why do I procrastinate more when I'm stressed? You're not imagining it. For many people, the more pressure they're under, the harder it becomes to start the work that matters most. Important tasks suddenly feel heavy, focus disappears, and procrastination shows up exactly when you need productivity the most. Most advice explains this as a motivation problem, but what's actually happening is something very different, because when stress increases, your brain doesn't become lazy, it becomes protective. In this video, we're going to explore why stress makes you procrastinate, how chronic pressure trains avoidance in the brain, and what you can do to break the pattern without forcing yourself through it. And if you've ever noticed that the harder you try to push through stress, the worse procrastination seems to get, this will explain why. When people think about productivity, they often assume the brain is trying to maximize performance, but your brain has a different priority: safety. Your nervous system is constantly asking one question: is this situation safe to engage with? Or should I conserve energy and avoid risk? Under normal circumstances, the thinking part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, handles planning, decision making, and focus. But when stress increases, the brain shifts into a different mode. Threat detection becomes stronger. Caution increases, decision-making narrows, your brain stops optimizing for long-term goals and starts optimizing for short-term protection. That shift alone explains a lot about procrastination, because the brain isn't trying to sabotage you, it's trying to reduce perceived risk. When stress levels rise, three things usually happen. First, cognitive load increases. Your brain starts tracking more problems, deadlines, expectations, uncertainty. Second, pressure increases. The stakes around the work feel higher. You don't just want to complete the task, you want to complete it well. Third, the cost of failure feels larger. Mistakes seem more dangerous. Judgment feels more likely. And when those three factors combine, the brain begins to treat the task as a potential threat, not a physical threat, but a psychological one. And that's the moment procrastination starts to make sense. Now, here's the part that most people don't realize. When stress happens occasionally, the brain can recover. But when pressure becomes chronic, when it's present every day, something else happens. The brain begins learning patterns. If every time you sit down to work you feel pressure, urgency, or overwhelm, your brain starts associating the work itself with discomfort, and over time, avoidance becomes the easiest way to regulate that discomfort. This is why chronic pressure often leads to patterns like starting tasks later and later, finding distractions more easily, or feeling a sudden resistance when you try to begin. Your brain has learned something. It has learned that avoiding the work temporarily reduces stress. And once that association forms, procrastination becomes much easier to trigger. This is why traditional productivity advice often fails under stress, because most advice tells you to push harder, work longer, apply more discipline. But if procrastination is partly a stress response, adding pressure makes the situation worse. Your brain interprets the extra pressure as more evidence that the task is risky, so resistance increases, which leads people to conclude something must be wrong with them. They assume they lack motivation or discipline or willpower, when in reality, their nervous system is doing exactly what it evolved to do: protect them from perceived threats. Once this pattern forms, it creates a loop. Pressure increases, avoidance appears. Avoidance creates guilt. Guilt increases pressure, and the cycle repeats. This loop explains why procrastination can feel so persistent, because the behaviour isn't random. It's reinforcing itself. Every time avoidance temporarily reduces stress, the brain learns, that worked. And the next time pressure appears, the same response becomes easier. I've made a separate video explaining the guilt loop that keeps procrastination going. I'll link that up here and in the description if you'd like to explore that pattern further. If chronic pressure trains avoidance, the solution is not more pressure. The solution is reducing the signals of threat around the work. That might involve lowering expectations, shrinking the scope of a task, clarifying the next step, or reducing cognitive load. All of these changes send a signal to the brain. This is manageable. This is safe to engage with. And once the brain perceives the task as safe enough, avoidance decreases naturally. One of the most effective ways to reduce resistance is to create safe entry points into work. Instead of committing to finishing a task, commit to interacting with it briefly. Open the document, write one sentence, sketch the outline. These small actions reduce the uncertainty around the task, and once uncertainty drops, engagement becomes easier. Momentum often appears naturally. If you want to understand how shrinking tasks helps the brain start work more easily, I've explained that in another video about micro missions, which I'll link up here and in the description. Understanding this pattern changes how you interpret procrastination. Instead of seeing it as a failure of character, you start recognizing it as information that the task feels overloaded, uncertain, or pressured. Once you interpret that signal correctly, you can adjust the work, and when the work changes, the behaviour often changes with it. The real shift isn't about forcing productivity. It's about understanding how the brain responds to pressure. Because once you realise that stress can train avoidance, you stop trying to overpower the brain and you start designing your work in a way that the brain can actually engage with. That shift alone solves a surprising amount of procrastination. If this explanation helped you understand why stress makes you procrastinate, the next video I recommend watching is Why Your Nervous System Resists Important Work. That video explores the deeper biology behind this pattern. I've linked it on screen now. You can also explore the full procrastination psychology playlist where I break down the hidden causes of procrastination and how to build momentum without pressure. And if you'd like more videos that explain productivity through psychology rather than discipline, consider subscribing to the channel. I would love that, because once you understand how the brain actually works, productivity becomes much easier to build.